Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Can you believe it's November already? I mean, I'm thankful for it because of the extra hour of sleep, which is needed every day of the year, but at least I get it once. But this year has just flown by. If you don't know what's happening today, I mean, we're already at the point where we are finishing the book of Daniel together today. That's crazy. Time has flown this year. It's made me think, like, time itself, it seems to go by super fast. Time is fleeting. It's going by so quickly, and we take so much for granted. And here's just a quick story I want to share with you. Now, you know, I have two daughters. This year, my oldest turned 4, and my youngest turned 2. But there was a time when I was a youth pastor at another church, and we had just had my oldest daughter when she was just a baby, and she stayed with me. So even when I was working, I would bring her to the church. She would be with me. And so there were these times where I would have meetings with the board or times for ministry, and we would go into the conference room, and I would have my daughter, Cara, my oldest, and I would set her on the table in front of me, and I would put my arms around her like I was the bassinet, and she would just be sleeping in my arms as I conducted a meeting. And she would sleep through the whole thing, and she'd just be there in my arms. And I don't really know the day that it happened, but there was a moment when it was the last time that she did that. And I sort of took it for granted. I didn't actively pursue those moments because they just happened naturally. And then one day they didn't. And time happened, and I look back both in sadness of those days are over, but also look at what else is ahead. Everything that she's learning, and she's talking and understanding how to add and subtract and doing all kinds of things that are just wonderful to see her grow and learn and become this person. But at the same time, I look back a little bit and just go, I remember those days when I just held you and he fell asleep in my arms. And to be honest, I feel a little bit that way with the ending of the book of Daniel. Like, this is one of my favorite books of the Bible. I love going through it. I was so excited to be able to share this book with you and go through it with you. And in one sense, today I'm a little sad that it's going to be over after today, but I'm also excited that I get to come back and go through other things with you. And all of God's Word is exciting. And so there's a bit of a passage of something new is happening. And we never seem to know when those fleeting moments are going to end. And that's true of what Daniel is speaking about. Daniel is a prophetic book. It's telling us about the time of the end. And that's no different than what we're going to hear from today in Daniel chapter 12. It is literally talking about the last days. It's the prediction that is filled through Daniel chapter 12. And it so echoes the words of Jesus in that no one knows the day or the hour. As he speaks in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13, no one knows the day or the hour. So what do you do with the time you have? And it's so reminds me of those days with my daughter of, gosh, I never knew when those days were going to end. So I had to soak up as much of that time with her as possible and be the best I could be for that situation as a dad to her. And as followers of Jesus, we need to be the best we can be in the time that we have of this age, because we don't know the day or the hour when the next stage begins in the prophetic timeline. So today we're going to finish Daniel. And so before we do, let's sort of get a glimpse of the big picture of what we've talked about thus far so that we're all on the same page when we get to Daniel chapter 12. I'll make it real fast. So in the first chapter, you see Daniel refusing the meat from the king's table. Basically, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar and to all of Babylon and the guards of Babylon, I will not consume what is unclean. There's so much we can learn from that just in our own daily lives. Following Daniel's example. Even though the world was offering him all of the pleasures and the king was giving him the choicest meat from his table, Daniel said, I won't consume what is unclean, because He doesn't worship the world, and he doesn't fall for its philosophies. He will only consume what is clean. And so he leaves the choice meat for vegetables. In the second chapter, Daniel, he helps Nebuchadnezzar understand a dream. He has a vision of a statue made of different metals, a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, a torso of bronze, and legs of iron, with feet mixed with iron and clay with the 10 toes. And so Daniel describes and helps Nebuchadnezzar understand what that statue is. And it's about future kingdoms and the kingdoms that are coming, and it's predicting the future as it relates to Israel. And so the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar, the chest of arms and silver were the kingdom of Persia, meaning the kingdom of Babylon would not last forever. It would be supplanted by an even weaker kingdom. And then that kingdom wouldn't last. It would be supplanted by the Greeks, and then that wouldn't last. It would be supplanted by Rome, and ultimately there would come a final kingdom that was a mixture of iron and clay, with sort of the background of what the glory of Rome was, but weak and brittle with clay. And in the time of those kings, a stone uncut from human hands would come and crush the statue and topple it over, meaning human government has ended, the rock has come. Jesus, who is the rock that we build our foundation on, would come and destroy. That is the future that was predicted to Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 3, we see Daniel's friends stand up to Nebuchadnezzar as he defies God and the statue that he dreamt of, and he builds a statue in all gold, saying, no, Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom will live forever. And then his friends refuse to bow to the statue, and Nebuchadnezzar throws them in the fiery furnace, and they survive because there happens to be a fourth member in the furnace, which looks like Jesus. In Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar gets humiliated. He addresses the nation, and he tells them all that Daniel had done for him, the way that Daniel had interpreted his dreams and predicted what God would do before it happened, and how Nebuchadnezzar's time in the wilderness where he went crazy and acted like an animal was predicted by God, and only when Nebuchadnezzar would humble himself before God was he restored to sanity and able to rule again. And he tells the whole nation of Babylon, you should worship the one true God. It's Daniel's God. And so even the cruelest, most powerful man on earth gets humbled by God. And it's likely we will see him in heaven. Daniel 5, the descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, fails to live up to the glory. And he sees a vision of handwriting on a wall. And he has Daniel interpret it for him. And Daniel says, your time has come to an end. Persia's coming to take over the kingdom. And Persia does that night. In the 6th chapter, Daniel is under new leadership. There's a new king in town, King Darius, and he's a Persian king. And the rest of the wise men get in King Darius's ear and say, you know what would be great? How can we subjugate these people? We can give them a time frame where they're only able to pray to you because of your glory. And all the ego of the king goes, that sounds good. That sounds like a great idea. So he writes out an edict, and Daniel openly defies it and says, I will only pray to God. And he prays with the windows open so that all can see what he's doing. And he gets arrested and thrown into the lion's den where he doesn't get eaten because he followed God's commands and he pursued the one true God and never gave in to cultural pressure. In Daniel 7 and Daniel chapter 8, we see two different visions, one of 4 beasts that are reminiscent to the 4 different metals found in the statue of chapter 2. In Daniel 8, it's more specific with a ram and a goat, talking about the kingdom of Persia and the kingdom of Greece that is coming. In Daniel chapter 9, there's a specific prophecy of the 70 weeks that are prepared for God in prophetic future. And it gets so detailed that I would say we don't have time to go through what that is. But ultimately, Daniel predicts when the Messiah will come and that there will be a 7-week period or a 7-year period before his return. In Daniel chapter 10, the beginning of his final vision, that's where we're at now. See, Daniel's in his final vision. Chapter 12 is the last part of that vision. And in chapter 10, he sees the coming reign of Persia. In chapter 11, we see a full prediction of incredibly detailed events that cover the 400 years between the Old and the New Testament. And we see how well it was fulfilled in history, yet Daniel predicted it before it would happen. And that's the first part of chapter 11. The second part of chapter 11, it ends with highlighting this character from the kingdom of Greece called Antiochus IV. And the picture of his life at the end of chapter 11 shows a foreshadowing of that ruler being a foreshadow of the ultimate Antichrist who will come at the end of times. And so we're dealing with the end of times, and chapter 12 begins. So what I would say is this is a book of prophecy. That's a great thing, but it's also filled with boatloads and truckloads of personal application that we can have because of the life Daniel lived throughout the prophecies he was giving. And so there's two things we can learn from this. One, what God has for the future and what is coming, even though we don't know the day or the hour. And the second thing is how to live well in light of that fact, because Daniel did. And so I think it's important to heed the words of Paul when we're dealing with the book of prophecy. In 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 18 through 20, Paul says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ for you. Do not quench the spirit. Do not despise prophecies." If we don't know the time, what do we do with the prophecies? How do we not despise them? If we don't know when something's coming, how do we live well with the time that we do or don't have? I think Jesus answers this question well when he gives the parable of the talents. In Luke 19, in verse 12, Jesus is telling a story, and it goes like this. "Therefore he said, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. So he called 10 of his servants, delivered them 10 minas, and said to them, 'Do business till I come.'" So Jesus is giving a parable about a guy who goes off he leaves only to receive lordship and kingdom, to come back at a time that the servants are unaware of. And he gives them things to take care of while he is gone, but they don't know when he will return. The story ultimately goes like this. To some servants he gives more, to some servants he gives less. But when he returns, he examines what they did with what he gives. Now, to a person he gives 10 talents, they doubled the money for the returning king, and they have 20 talents. To the person he gave 5, they double what the king gave them. He wasn't king when he left, but he's king when he returns. And he doubles what he had stewardship over. But to the person he only gave one talent, he buried it in the ground. And he goes to the king when he returns, and he says, "Look, I know you're harsh, and I know you judge harshly, so I made sure I didn't lose anything. Here's my 1 talent. And with that 1 talent, he says, "You wicked and unfaithful servant," and he throws him into the den where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, because he wasn't faithful with what he was given. He didn't do anything with it. He didn't invest in his time. And in verse 13 of Luke 19, when he says, "Do business until I come," you don't know when he's returning, but he's still expecting you to be active with what he's given you. So until this time that Daniel 12 talks about comes, we are to occupy. We are to do what he has asked us to do. But today is about finishing the book of Daniel. So let's open up to Daniel chapter 12 and see what God has in store. "At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. There shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book." So it starts out with these couple of verses, basically Daniel saying, there is coming a time in the future that is unlike any other. The trial and tribulation that you are expecting is unlike any other. Now, in the previous chapter, he went through a time where there was a ruler who was so evil, he slaughtered thousands and enslaved thousands of the Jewish people. He slaughtered a pig on their altar and defiled the temple of God, erected a statue of Zeus in the holy place, and forced them to eat parts of the slaughtered pig on the altar. I mean, he defiled everything in the Levitical law and ruled over them with an iron fist. And Daniel is saying, yeah, I know I predicted that, but what's coming next, what's coming at the end is even worse. That's a foreshadowing, but it's not even close to how bad it will be at the end. And he says, at that time, your people, meaning the people of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, will be delivered, everyone who is found in the book. Now, what is the book that is referring to? It's talking about the Lamb's book of life. It's mentioned in the book of Revelation. It's mentioned in Exodus 32 when Aaron makes the golden calf and Moses gets upset and God basically says, I'll blot those out of the book of life. It's mentioned in Psalm 69 when David prays. This book is all throughout Scripture. It's about those whom God will save. And so God is saying at the end, there will be a time when your people, the people Israel, the nation, the ethnic descendants of Jacob, will be saved, those who are found in the book of life, the faithful remnant of the descendants of Jacob at the end of time. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So all the way back in Daniel, we have this prediction that in the future, there will be some sort of waking up, some to life and some to shame and contempt. This is mirrored in the Gospel of John. In John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29, it says this, "Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation." So all will resurrect. Some will resurrect to life and to glory and receive the glorified bodies because of the forgiveness on the cross of Christ. Some will resurrect to judgment. And so this is really telling us that all humanity has a binary choice. Heaven and hell is a binary choice. There's no third option. And the question is, where do you want to end up? And what do you trust to get you there? Because only Jesus can get you there. He tells us that himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So the only way to the resurrection to life is through Christ. If we try to do it on our own, if we depend on our own works, our own good deeds, or our own intentions, then we will be part of the resurrection unto condemnation, because only Jesus' righteousness can cover us to get us through to the resurrection of life. And even back in the book of Daniel, it says, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting contempt. But in the next verse, it says, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Now, I love this verse because it's echoing a universal truth in the story of humanity. Those who follow Christ and have accepted the grace and forgiveness of the cross and put their faith in Jesus to cover their sins, God has called you out. The rules that Jesus set up for the church are go and make disciples, love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Right? Be salt. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the earth. Your city standing on a hill. You don't cover it with a bowl. Those are the things Jesus has called us to do, to be a light in the darkness, like the stars in the sky. What I find interesting is I recently moved out here when Come to Life got started, but I haven't always lived in this sort of suburban area close to the city. And one of the hardest things for me living out here is the night sky. It is not the same as when I lived in the middle of nowhere. And I could look up at the sky and see all the stars and even see some of the Milky Way, where now I see the moon and streetlights. That's what I see now. Because the darker it is, the brighter the light shines. It's been flooded out here with streetlights. Well, wouldn't it be kind of nice if the church grew to a point where the darkness was flooded with the light? However, we're called, regardless of how dark it is, to shine brighter. If the world gets darker and the culture gets darker and our communities get darker, we should be that much easier to see in light of that. Like the stars in the night sky, be a light in the darkness. Verse 4, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. This is really speaking of prophetic knowledge. This is really interesting. Daniel is told by this heavenly being, Daniel, seal up this book until the time has come. And in light of that sentence, it says, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Now, some have separated the knowledge shall increase from the context of the verse, which doesn't make sense. And they say, oh, like we're in the information age, so it must be the time of the end. Like there's much more information available to ever. Sure, that's true. There is more information available than ever, but that's not what it's talking about. It's connected to the beginning. Shut up the words and seal the book of prophecy, and then towards the end, knowledge shall increase. Knowledge of what? The prophetic. The things that didn't make sense in book of Daniel and Ezekiel and Isaiah and things that you can look at it and go, how is God going to do that? I mean, when Isaiah wrote that the nation of Israel will be reborn in a single day in chapter 66, they're like, that doesn't make any sense. When Isaiah wrote it, they were a nation, and then when they returned from Persia, they weren't a sovereign nation. They were still under the reign of Persia. None of this makes sense until, of course, 1948, where they were reborn into a nation in a single day. And so the sealing the book until the things start to make sense, and then an increase of knowledge of the prophetic will start to come. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on his riverbank and the other on that riverbank. And one said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Well, we don't know when the starting point is, but we do know that at some point there will be a midway point, and from there will be a time, times, and half a time, or a year, a duality of years, or 2 years, and then half a year, 3.5 years, until these things are finished. So during the final period of God's judgment on the earth, before the return of the Messiah, there will be a 3.5-year period in particular where this man, who looks a whole lot like Antiochus Epiphanes, is reigning, yet even far worse than it was during the intertestamental period. In verse 8, although I heard, I did not understand, and I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So Daniel says, wait, when is this happening? All right, and you showed me this vision. I understand that there's this future kingdom that's coming. It's going to be led by this character that you've shown me, or a version of this character that you've shown me, but he'll be far worse. When is this coming? Why are you telling me this? And God says, don't worry about it. It's not for you to know. Be sealed up until the end. However, before that, here's what's going to happen. Here's the good news. Because the end is, this judgment of God seems dreary, but here's the good news. Before that comes, Many shall be purified, made white, and refined. But the wicked will do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So before we get to this final judgment, before we get to the time of the end, there will be this group that gets made purified and made white. Well, interestingly, in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, Jesus writes letters to the churches. And a common theme when he talks to the churches for those individuals who persevere within the church will be clothed in white and purified. So this to me seems to be an indication to Daniel, who has already predicted the coming of the Messiah in Daniel 9 when he dealt with the first 69 weeks of the 70 weeks. And then there's the 7-year period and then the return of that Messiah. So he's saying after that time frame, there is this purification. The church happens. Many will be purified, many will be refined and put in white garments. The church comes. The age of grace exists before the time of the end. That's the time we're in. The age of grace, the time that's covered by the cross. And when it says occupy till he comes, that's the message we have to occupy with until he comes. That's the message we invest in to produce a larger kingdom for Jesus to reign over. That's what we do to occupy till he comes. If we want to do business until he comes, that business is to spread the gospel, to go and make disciples of all nations. That's the job that we have at hand. So that good news before the time of the end is that many who will be purified, the church will grow. And from that time, the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up. There shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits. It comes to the 1,335 days. Now, if that statement didn't confuse you, good for you. I don't understand you, but it's interesting. Now, we did get a little bit of some insight. There's this thing called the abomination of desolation that happens. That happens at the midway point of this last 7 years of God's judgment. From that point forward is the last 3.5 years. So we got a little insight there. That's the time times and half a time, sure. But then it says, blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,390 days. And then comes to blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. So you got 1,290 days, 1,335 days. There's a 45-day difference there. What's that about? And that's not all that's confusing. Are you ready? Because I'm going to make it worse. In Revelation chapter 12, in verse 6, it says, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And that's talking about after the abomination of desolation occurs and the children of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, go flee into the wilderness and they're taken care of by God for 3.5 years, for 1,260 days. But Daniel says there's 1,290 days, which is, there's a 30-day difference there, and then ultimately a 75-day difference, or it added 45 days to the 1,290 days for the 1,335 days. And then, of course, you want it worse? Here it comes. Revelation 11 has two different moments where it talks about the court of the Gentiles in verse 40. In Revelation 11, it has the court of the Gentiles being tread underfoot for 42 months, and the two witnesses prophesying for 1,260 days. So now you've got 42 months, two different versions of 1,260 days, of 1,209 days and 1,335 days. All right, and then in Revelation 13, it says that there will be 42 months for basically the Antichrist will be given a mouth speaking blasphemies and authority to continue. So all in all, you have 42 months and then another 42 months, or 3.5 years. You have 1,260 days and then another 1,260 days, or you have 1,290 days and then 1,335 days, and somehow it all makes sense. So are you with me? Do you get it? I don't need to explain any of that, right? You get it? What does it all mean? Are you ready for this big, wonderful, insightful statement? I don't know. I have a guess, but I'm not willing to claim theological proof on it. I have a guess, though. Here would be my guess. The 3.5 years and 3.5 years are two different periods that equal 7 years. That's just simple math. Thank you. But then you have 1,260 days and 1,260 days. What is that? Well, that's 3.5 years and then another 3.5 years. So why are there 30 days tacked onto that? Well, I think after the 7 years, it tells us pretty clearly in Revelation 19 that Jesus returns and wipes out his enemies in the valley of Armageddon. Okay, there you go. End of the 7 years. Now there's an extra 30 days. Well, Matthew 25 is Jesus answering the question to his disciples about the end, what it will look like and when he comes. And in Matthew 25, he shares about this judgment called the sheep and the goats. So maybe, again, I don't know, but maybe that extra 30 days is Jesus dealing with the judgment of the sheep and the goats, separating the sheep from the goats, the nations who were faithful and treated Israel well, those who did not, the individuals within those nations, and that might take some time on earth to figure out. But then you've got another 45 days, and what's that all about? Well, in Jude, we're told that Jesus, the Messiah, is going to return with tens of thousands of his saints, and we're going to rule and reign with him. So that just might be after the separation of the sheep and the goats. Now it's time to delineate the nations. And as Jesus is setting up the millennial kingdom, he's divvying up the different areas and land masses and properties that each of his saints has dominion over as they report to him. So my guess, and this is just a guess, is that the separation of these days is, one, no one knows the day or the hour, so it's meant to be kind of confusing. But two, it will take time for this judgment to happen because it will take place on earth where time passes. So you have time for the judgment of the sheep and the goats, and then the setting up of the millennial kingdom, and divvying out responsibility. That's what I think. There you go. Hopefully that made some sense to you. If it didn't, it's all right. You just, when people ask you, you say, I don't know. And here's how Daniel chapter 12 ends. After all of that, after all of this information about coming kingdoms and ultimately the end and the way different rulers will handle their interactions with Israel and the world, all of that, and Daniel's question about what does this mean? When is this going to happen? And the angel is telling him, just don't worry about it. Shut the book up. It's sealed until the end. This is the final words to Daniel. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. So what Daniel is told is you go about your business. Occupy till he comes. And because of who you are, Daniel, and because of your faith in God, you're part of that group that gets inherited the eternal life. You're part of that group that gets resurrected unto life at the end of days. So occupy till he comes. And the way that it's written to Daniel is not the way it's written in the Gospels. When it's written in the Gospels and Jesus is sharing that story, he says, occupy till he comes. He's giving a direction to people who haven't lived it out yet. But when it's given to Daniel, it says, go your way. Do what you've been doing. Why? Because occupy till he comes is exactly what Daniel has been doing. Daniel is the example that we should follow. Daniel refused to consume what is unclean at the expense of his own life. Are we willing to be uncomfortable not to participate with what is unclean in the world? Daniel's the example we should follow. Daniel openly proclaimed the truth when it was unpopular at the expense of his own life. Are we willing to be uncomfortable and share the truth when it's unpopular? That's the question. Daniel openly prayed and worshiped God when it was forbidden regardless of what the circumstances and outcome would be. It didn't matter the cost. Daniel did what was right. He refused to partake in what was unclean. He only shared the truth openly, even when it could cost him his life. And he openly prayed and worshiped God when it was forbidden and it could have cost him his life. That is occupying till he comes. That is what the church is called to do. It is the reason that the first century church was martyred so quickly. Because when the world was opposed to the church, those people, the apostles, stood on truth at the expense of their own life. And because of their work, the church expanded to what it is today. And in the 21st century, the church, especially in the West, has shrunk. Because believers have lost their fortitude. We've lost our spine and our gumption to stand up, and we've sat down. Will we be like Daniel? Will we refuse to participate in what's unclean? Will we speak the truth when it's unpopular? And will we openly pray and worship God when the world forbids it? And last but not least, will we look forward to the coming of the Messiah as predicted here in Daniel 12? Occupy till he comes. Let's pray. Father God, thank you. Thank you for your word of truth. Thank you for giving us the truth in the person of Jesus Christ. Thank you for the sacrifice that covers our sin. I pray that we have the faith to come to you to cover our sin and to receive that grace, but also be emboldened by it to speak truth in a world of darkness, to shine brighter when the culture is darker, to be loving in a time of hate. Help us to occupy till you come and to look forward to that day. In Jesus' name I pray.